This is episode 4 of the Cat House Hollywood podcast. Let me ask you a question. Do you know the true history of the Headbangers Ball? Hell, do you even know the origin of the word headbanger? Do you? What band used the word headbanger first? I bet you don't really know. Portions of this podcast are brand new, and some have been posted before. But as I promised in the first 3 episodes, I'm going to be editing, remixing all the best episodes and recording new ones. So by all means, subscribe to this podcast, download this podcast, leave us a good review, and most important, tell your friends so I can keep this thing going for free. This episode has a little bit of everything, but it's focusing on the start of the Headbangers Ball and the end of the Headbangers Ball. And we even go back way before the Headbangers Ball even started. So I'm focusing on a time that happened well over 25 years ago. I've been blessed with some of the most incredible jobs. I've been on a bunch of TV shows, including some fun reality shows like Daisy of Love and The Rock of Love. I ran the greatest rock and roll club called the Cat House. I had a successful run in talk radio. I even worked in wrestling. In motorsports, I've worked for NBC Sports and Fox. I had a racing radio show called Racing Rocks that was on the radio every weekend for 20 years. I don't want to sound like I'm bragging right now, but I have ridden a motorcycle coast to coast 14 times, and I've donated close to $250,000 to charity. I would say the job that I'm most proud of is what I've been doing recently, is going on tour with my show One Foot in the Gutter, where I get up on stage and I tell stories for about 2.5 hours, and that's probably what I'm most proud of. But it doesn't matter how many times I got on stage. It doesn't matter what shows I've done in the past or probably what I do in the future. I know that I'll always be known as that guy that hosted MTV's Headbangers Ball, a heavy metal video show on every Saturday night, usually at midnight. Yes, I was the host of Headbangers Ball for 5 years, from 1990 to 1995. Headbangers Ball was shown all over the world. Headbangers Ball had been seen by millions of people who would spend their Saturday nights watching me. And many of those would watch and think to themselves, I could do a better job than that guy. We're waiting outside. We're on Highland, another warm Southern California night. We're walking up to the club. And yes, there is a line, but remember, you're my friend. We don't wait in a line. Let's walk through the doors. Let's climb up the stairs. Why don't you go over to the bar right there, grab yourself a Blacktooth Grin. Oh, okay, here's a drink ticket. You good? Okay. Let's talk about the Headbangers Ball. And let's do it inside the Cat House Hollywood podcast. The Cat House Hollywood podcast is brought to you by cathousehollywood.com. Of course it is. A place that you can get high quality, badass apparel that you can't find anywhere else. Cat House, OFITG, Headbangers Ball. We've got some incredible Headbangers Ball hoodies, just a few available. If you go to cathousehollywood.com and use the code BALL4, you're going to get 10% off, and that's valid only until May 1st. cathousehollywood.com, use the code BALL4, and get 10% off your order. So, like I said, I'll probably always be known as that guy from Headbangers Ball. And there was a time that I kind of downplayed those 5 years I spent on MTV. I was busy trying to make a name for myself in talk radio, TV, and motorsports, getting a lot of shows, getting rejected for a lot of shows. And no matter how successful my other projects or shows were, and like I said, a lot of them weren't, I was always reminded by people that I was that guy from Headbangers Ball. And then I thought about it a little bit. Maybe you could call it soul searching. Usually, people will stop me and tell me that they grew up with Headbangers Ball, which of course makes me feel really old, especially when I see someone that to me looks like a really old person, and then they come up and tell me that they watched me when they were growing up. But for me to just like kind of brush off people's memories of the Headbangers Ball, that's kind of a dick move, so I'm coming clean. I mean, the Headbangers Ball was truly important to millions of people all over the world. I don't think for a second that I, Riki Rachtman, am the reason the show was so popular. I know that I was just a host. And Headbangers Ball was an outlet for people that wanted heavy music. Of course, everyone's opinion on what heavy music is totally different. And yes, there were a lot of fans, and yes, there were a lot of haters. And the haters, well, they tend to be a little bit more vocal. They had no problem voicing what they liked and, of course, what they didn't. And remember, this was before the internet. Thank God there wasn't internet at the time. I might have had a hard time dealing with some of this stuff. But we're going to go back to before I was the host of Headbangers Ball, before Jamie Josta was the host of Headbangers Ball, before Adam Curry, Kevin Seal, or Julie Brown were the hosts of Headbangers Ball. Because, yes, all of them were. I want to go way back before MTV's Headbangers Ball. Actually, I want to go way back to the origin of the word headbanger and the origin of the word Headbangers Ball, which you're going to be really surprised about. I asked some of you to leave a message as to when the first time you ever heard the word headbanger was. And I'm going to get to all of that after I tell you about it's time for a plug here. I don't have advertisers. I would love to have a couple advertisers. If you want to advertise on this show, just let me know. But in the meantime, I use the advertising time to plug my own things. Like right now, I'm going to talk about One Foot in the Gutter, which is my storytelling show. It's kind of a play. It's kind of spoken word, but it's badass. And I know that for me to talk about it sounds kind of like, of course you're going to like the show, Riki. But I've done a lot of things that I didn't like the job I did. But on this show, I'm really, really proud of it. The show's gotten awesome reviews. We've had 40 shows, 4 in Australia, but I never did a show in Las Vegas. Can you believe that? Well, it is coming up in July. I will also be giving special tours of the Punk Rock Museum that same week. I'm not going to give you all the dates and the links right now because you're listening to this podcast and I don't want to disturb your listening enjoyment, but just plan on being in Vegas July 19th, 20th, 21st, and 22nd because I'm going to try to find other things to do in Vegas. We're just going to make it a big party, okay? So One Foot in the Gutter is coming to Las Vegas, and I'll give you all of those details a little bit later in the show. So Headbangers Ball. Should we check on Wikipedia? How about Wikipedia? Sorry, I apologize. So what is a headbanger, really? What is headbanging? Hell, if you're here, you probably know real well. If you listen to some killer music with a heavy beat, you can't help it, right? I mean, I know I can't. If you played Walk by Pantera or Black Sabbath Paranoid in front of a baby, not too loud, of course, well, that baby will start bobbing his head forward and backward instinctively. I don't have kids. I have no idea if this is really true and probably shouldn't try it because your kid might turn out like me. But if you play the song Leper Messiah by Metallica, there's going to be a set of neurons located deep within the brain's medial temporal lobe, and it's going to produce a reaction that causes your head to move forward and back. Forward and back. You are headbanging. Now, when was the term headbanging first used?
Don Delamont, and I'm calling from Atlanta, Georgia. I'm also known as the Great Southern Brain Fart. The first time I ever heard the term headbanger, believe it or not, was right after Quiet Riot's Mental Health album came out. And I was listening to it, and it was right around the time I had just gotten into heavy metal. And my dad heard me listening to Mental Health, and the part where it says bang your head, my dad said, so what does that mean, bang your head? And I kind of showed him, and my dad said, oh, so you're a headbanger?
Riki, my name's Tarek, Grand Rapids, Michigan. First time I really heard the term headbangers, probably like 13, was Halloween. And me and my buddies, we'd always go out trick-or-treating, and then we'd change costumes, go back out. We were at my buddy Eric's house, and his sister was playing the record the song Bang Your Head by Quiet Riot.
And from Studio City, California. I think it came from England, because that's where we saw the guys in the videos banging their heads.
Hey, Ricky, this is Tad in Johnson City, Tennessee. first time I ever heard the word headbanger was in the Sammy Hagar song Heavy Metal from the movie when it came out back in 1981. Yeah, I'm getting old.
Riki, this is Matt Daly calling from the Pacific Beach section of San Diego, California. The term headbanger was coined by Motorhead fans. Motor headbangers, as Lemmy detailed in The Decline of Western Civilization, Volume 2. That's where it came from as far as I'm concerned.
That is up for debate. Some of you say, oh, the LA band Quiet Riot in 1982, they released a song called Metal Health, and that song was also released under the name Bang Your Head. Kevin Dubrow, who is the singer Quiet Riot, says, bang your head several times in the song. Bang your head. Metal Health will drive you mad. Bang your head. Wake the dead. Bang your head. He never really says headbanger, but that doesn't matter because I had already heard the term headbanger way before that. Anybody that listens to this podcast knows of my love as a teen for punk rock. To the uneducated listener, punk rock may all sound the same. But just like you've got heavy metal, there are a whole bunch of different genres and subgenres and tribes. Some may mistake oi music, which was a type of punk rock, as the type of music for skinheads or white supremacists, which is not entirely true. In the 70s, there was a group of punk bands that catered to all genres of punk rock with an emphasis on the disenchanted working people in the UK. They weren't racists at all. These were bands like Sham 69, Angelic Upstarts, Coxbar, and a band that I really liked, the Cockney Rejects. And sure, they sang about unemployment and lyrically voiced their contempt for political figures, but they also had like really fun songs. The Cockney Rejects released their first album, and that album was called Cockney Rejects Greatest Hits. Yeah, you got that right. This was Cockney Rejects' first album, and the album was released as Cockney Rejects Greatest Hits. That's great. I guess it was the all-time greatest hits because that was all the songs they ever had. In 1979, on the Greatest Hits album, their debut album, they had a song called Headbanger. This is 1979, and listen to these lyrics. I can't resist loud music. I could hear it until I drop. I've got scruffy jeans and biker boots, and my hair is like a mop. Headbanger. So, Cockney Rejects first used the term headbanger, right? No. Lemmy has mentioned that the term headbanger was taken from the term Motorhead Banger, which was the fan club and fanzine of Motorhead fans. I would never doubt Lemmy on anything, ever. The first Motorhead album was released in the summer of 1977. If you are a crazy, true, hardcore Motorhead fan, you might know that there was a Motorhead album released in 1975. Okay, let me take that back. There was a Motorhead album recorded in 1975, but that album was shelved and ended up being released in 1979 after Motorhead was already starting to get big. So, for discussion's sake, Motorhead's debut was 1977. The Motorhead Bangers were formed shortly after that. I had heard the word headbanger at least a year before that. It was on an album that I owned as a kid. This was my first recollection of the word headbanger. The album was called Leave Home. It was released way back in 1976. It was the second album from the Ramones. The song was called Susie is a Headbanger. In the lyrics, Joey tells us that Susie is a headbanger and that her mother is a geek. But even though he says the word headbanger over and over 7 times, there's no reference to rock or being a rock fan. The inspiration for Susie as a headbanger was a 1947 film called Nightmare Alley. And it was the story about a mind reader. And there's a guy that eats live chickens. And, well, it doesn't have anything to do with music at all. And that was put out in 1947. And just a side note, because I really like horror films, Guillermo del Toro is going to be doing a gnarly remake of this movie. But I'm getting sidetracked. So, who invented the word headbanger? I just mentioned a reference from 1976 with a song called Susie is a Headbanger, but that doesn't mean that they invented it. The truth of the matter is, I'm not exactly sure. But that's the first time I heard it, 1976. There is another source that could be the first time headbanger was used, and this was in 1969 during Led Zeppelin's first U.S. tour. During a show at the Boston Tea Party concert venue, audience members in the first row were banging their heads against the stage with the rhythm of the music. I don't think they were literally banging their heads on the stage. I don't know. But allegedly, that was where the term headbanger was coined. By the way, if I play metal music in my house, my African gray parrot starts banging his head. So in the animal world, I guess it's just normal that when you hear this really good beat, you start to bang your head. So we now move to the term Headbangers Ball. Of course, I didn't come up with that because the show had been on MTV for years before I became the Headbangers Ball guy. And from what I can tell, the term Headbangers Ball was not created by MTV. There was a DJ in the UK, his name was John Brent. I don't know John Brent. I never met John Brent. Ironically, it seems like we have a few similarities. Back in the early 80s, John would do these like events where he would play hard rock and heavy metal music, sort of like what the Cat House was in the early days. It wasn't bands, he was just playing music, and people would go and hear this DJ play music. From what I would gather, he did these shows like once a month, and he even did stuff like used props, like he had a pirate ship. All night, all he would do was play metal. My club in America was Cat House. John Brent's night was called Headbangers Ball. Yeah, he had the title first. He would do these Headbangers Ball shows from different venues, and he'd also compile hard rock and heavy metal charts for magazines like Sound and Kerrang! And the charts were called Headbangers Ball Rock Charts. Now, let's go back to America. It's 1985. I have yet to even open the Cat House. Bands like Guns N' Roses are just starting to form. Motley Crue is in a total glam phase with Theater of Pain. David Lee Roth had recently gone solo, released Crazy from the Heat. Kiss didn't have makeup at that time, and they released Asylum with the song Tears Are Falling. Slayer had Hell Awaits. But the charts were dominated by the biggest albums from the biggest acts. Bruce Springsteen, Madonna Like a Virgin, Princess Purple Rain. In 1985, Twisted Sister had released Come Out and Play. That same year, Dee Snider showed the world he wasn't some dumb guy in a metal band. And I know I've referenced this on the show, but I'm going to reference it again because it's very pivotal. Dee Snider, the singer of Twisted Sister, found himself giving testimony to the United States Senate Committee on Commerce in a congressional hearing on record labeling. If you recall the PMRC, they were trying to expose all the evil vileness that lurked in the lyrics of heavy metal music. PMRC leader was Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife. She claimed that one of the Twisted Sister songs, Under the Blade, encouraged sadomasochism, bondage, and rape. In the testimony, Dee Snider replied, and I quote this, "The lyrics she quoted have absolutely nothing to do with these topics. On the contrary, the words in question are about surgery and the fear that it instills in people. I can say categorically that the only sadomasochism, bondage, and rape in this song is in the Mind of Miss Gore. That's classic. Showing that he could talk as well as rock. Oh, God, did I just say that? Dee got together with MTV. They created a show that featured heavy metal videos, and that show was called Heavy Metal Mania. The show was only on once a month, but it was the precursor to the Headbangers Ball. I guess you could say Dee Snider was the first host of Headbangers Ball, but it wasn't called Headbangers Ball. It was called Heavy Metal Mania. And from what Dee tells me, he hosted the show, and then he wanted to get paid to do it, and then MTV ended up canning Heavy Metal Mania. So 1986 comes along. It's a glorious year for hard rock and heavy metal. And no, I'm not just saying that because in September of 86, me and my roommate Tammy down at Faster Pussycat opened the Cat House. Rock was big in 86. It wasn't only just rearing its ugly head. It was a carnivorous beast with sights on taking over. Bands were playing arenas. Bands were selling records. Heavy metal bands were selling millions of records. Guns N' Roses were on the verge of breaking. Hell, everyone was. And when a band would make a video, sometimes it would get slipped into rotation at any random time. Motley Crue had the Home Sweet Home video, but you could easily play that between Cyndi Lauper and Whitney Houston. Cat House at this time was thriving. Metal was thriving. But 1986 passed without a venue to showcase heavy metal on the music channel. In 1986, I didn't have MTV. I had no money. Come on, what do you think I'm going to do? Spend my money on cable TV or whiskey? I drank a lot of whiskey back then. 1987 comes along. The biggest selling album on the planet is Appetite for Destruction. The Cult releases Electric, which I've said before was a big game changer. Def Leppard Hysteria, Anthrax Among the Living, Faster Pussycat released their debut album. Motley Crue releases Girls, Girls, Girls. This is 1987. There's new albums by Dio and Whitesnake and Aerosmith and Ozzy and Motorhead. And metal is selling records, lots of records. And metal is selling out arenas. MTV in 1987 started airing this show called 120 Minutes, which featured, and I don't know which other word to use, it featured alternative artists. Bands like the Jesus and the Mary Chain and the Replacements, Morrissey, Dinosaur Jr. It was a specialty music show. So rather than bring in a new host that was part of the underground fringe music, they would just use the same VJs that were playing the popular music during the day. So you had your J.J. Jacksons and your Alan Hunter and Downtown Julie Brown and everyone's favorite VJ, Martha Quinn. The point is, 1 minute, Downtown Julie Brown is leading into How Will I Know from Whitney Houston, and then a little bit later, she's playing Skinny Puppy or Iggy Pop in 120 minutes. So the show did all right, gave MTV a little credibility in breaking some new bands or giving artists that were only known by the cool few exposure to the masses. You know, what if that same formula was done with heavy metal? And I'm just guessing here, but knowing metal fans, I'm sure that there were quite a few complaints when Dee Snider's Metal Mania was taken off the air. So MTV figures, okay, let's see what happens if we play a bunch of metal videos in a block of programming. Of course, we know metal is a very subjective term. To some, metal is Slayer. To some, metal can be Poison. So when I say the word metal, it is the most general of terms. Surprisingly, even though there was no internet or a place to showcase metal videos in 1987, a few bands still spent a little money on production to make music videos. So MTV decides that they're going to try a late night metal show and use the title the DJ John Brent used in the UK. I have no idea if there was like a deal struck up or if they just used it without asking. What I do know is April 18th, 1987, the very first episode of the Headbangers Ball debuts. Who was the first host of Headbangers Ball? What was the first video ever played on Headbangers Ball? I've got all that and much more, but I just want to tell you that this show, the Cat House Hollywood podcast, probably sounds like a bong, but it's not. It's me drinking the best damn coffee ever. It is called Cat House Coffee. It's a real coffee company. You're not going to find any other company's labels on our bags because we go to the roaster. We come up with the best coffee, and I'm very, very proud of this dark roast. If you want to try Cat House Coffee, just go to cathousecoffee.com. But I am warning you, it will become your new favorite coffee. Travel with me now back to 1987. The number one TV show is The Cosby Show. The Simpsons aired their first episode in 1987. Police Academy 4 is number one in the movie theaters. I didn't even know they made 4 Police Academies, but let alone that Police Academy 4 was the number one movie in the theaters. In 1987, gas was 89 cents. The average monthly rent was $395. In 1987, The Simpsons debuted on television, and April 18th, 1987, MTV debuted the Headbangers Ball. Gotta go big when it comes to the metal community. Who are you going to have host the first show? I have to say, the first host of MTV's Headbangers Ball was the perfect first host. You had Motorhead's Lemmy and Phil Filthy Animal Taylor. All I can say is they were in rare form. It was the Lemmy that I know and the Lemmy that we all love. He got it. It's rock. People, don't be so damn serious. My God, this is metal, and Lemmy wasn't that serious. I don't like the serious stuff. Lemmy wore swimming goggles, and he introduced himself as Jacques Cousteau. At one point, Phil got hit in the head with a dustbin. Lemmy told a story about finding Ozzy with his pants around his ankle. And I'm not going to assume anything because I don't know for sure, but you guys know that I was friends with Lemmy, and I've seen him with a good buzz on before, and it seemed to me that the first episode, he was pretty smashed, but in a really good, fun Lemmy way. So, what band was the very first video to be played on Headbangers Ball? It wasn't Motorhead. I don't think a lot of thought was even put into it. This was the first Headbangers Ball ever, and the first video ever played on the Headbangers Ball was Somebody Save Me by Cinderella. Let me start by saying I love the band Cinderella. I think that song kicks ass big time. But that was the very first song ever played on this new heavy metal video show. I sent a text to Fred Corey, the drummer of Cinderella, and I said, did you know that Cinderella was the first video ever played on Headbangers Ball? And he had no idea. I didn't even know that. You know what the second video was? It was Dockin' with Dream Warriors. And if you remember that video, it was the video and the song was from the movie A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, and there was a young Patricia Arquette in the video. And then the third video was Aerosmith, Let the Music Do the Talking, and then Motorhead, Mean Machine. All in all, on the very first episode of the Headbangers Ball, there were 23 videos played. That's a lot. And you had Poison and Ozzy and Crocus and Wasp, Twisted Sister, and the show ended with Motorhead, Ace of Spades. If I was programming the Headbangers Ball, which of course I never did, I probably would have started the first episode of the Headbangers Ball with Motorhead Ace of Spades. That's the perfect one to start it, right? Either way. And I don't think MTV even knew that Headbangers Ball was going to make the impact that it did. History was made. Heavy metal videos, Lemmy and Filthy Animal causing trouble. Perfect, right? Yes. It was so great. And I lived in Hollywood, so I could go out and see bands all the time, and I knew bands, and this was part of my scene. But, you know, there were millions and millions of people that didn't live in LA, that didn't get to see these bands. Even more importantly, probably you listening right now, if you watch the Headbangers Ball, you might not have been old enough to go out. So this is a venue for all these crazy metalhead fans to see metal in their home. You had your first episode. MTV was committing to do the Headbangers Ball every Saturday night. This was great. Week 2, the host was Howard Stern. Yeah, Howard Stern actually hosted the Headbangers Ball. In 1987, Howard had still been playing a few songs in his radio show. It was like mostly talk, but he still played a few songs. He'd only been nationally syndicated a few years, and everybody knew the name Howard Stern on the East Coast, but he hadn't even been on the radio in Los Angeles yet, and he wouldn't for a few years. Again, MTV decided, look, this is heavy metal music. This is party music. Let's have fun. Let's get a little crazy, maybe even dangerous, unpredictable. Howard Stern was perfect. His co-host was Leslie West from the band Mountain. Mountain had a hit with the song Mississippi Queen, which is a great song. But that was a hit in 1970. Howard looked like a rock star. He sang a few songs. One that was about the FCC. I think it was called The Times They Are Changing. It was raw. It wasn't polished. To be honest, if you watch it, it looked kind of like a public access show. Of course, Howard Stern brought some girls out. It almost had the feel of like kind of Wayne's World now that I think about it. But this was way before Wayne's World. But it was cool because it was metal and it was great. So the first video on episode 2 of Headbangers Ball was Megadeth, Wake Up Dead. That and Overkill's In Union We Stand were the heaviest tracks. But there was also the bands that were huge at the time played that night. Cinderella, Poison, Whitesnake, Motley Crue. It's kind of surprising that there wasn't a Headbangers Ball and bands like Megadeth and Overkill even made videos. MTV continued to bring in guest hosts every week, and I have no problem admitting on the grand scale of cool, the guest hosts that they had when the show started were a lot cooler than me. Show 3 was hosted by Ozzy Osbourne, and the band Autograph joined Ozzy, and they did a guitar giveaway, and that guitar was signed by Ozzy and Motley Crue's Vince Neil, Poison CC DeVille, George Lynch from Dokken. It was a cool giveaway, and the first for a show that in the future would have some really substantial contests on the Headbangers Ball. I'm so stoked that I got to be part of those. So I was looking at the list of the videos that were played on the first episodes of the Headbangers Ball in 1987, and it's pretty much what you would expect. There were a few obscure bands at the time. Do you remember that band Easy O? They were from Japan. The song that they played, I'm thinking it was called Flashback Heart Attack, but the song that they had that I really liked was House of a Thousand Pleasures. Easy O. I just played that video just because I hadn't seen it for a long time and it brought back memories. And that was a freaking good song. So Headbangers Ball had the biggest metal bands, and they had the biggest metal bands that had videos at the time. Judas Priest, Motorhead, Poison, Cinderella. But one thing that was kind of interesting, like I looked at for the random videos, in each of the first 3 episodes, you had a Warlock, and then you had a band that I'm going to be honest with you, I never heard of, and they were one of the few bands that was in the first 3 episodes of Headbangers Ball. They had a video in episode 1, 2, and 3. They were part of the British metal wave, and that band was called Shy. I guess Shy was big at the time, and you listeners might know the band Shy, but I had never heard of Shy until I started researching this show. They were in the first 3 episodes, and the video that they played was Break Down the Walls, which was a song that was co-written by Don Dokken. They had big hair, lots of makeup. They were that typical type of, and you know I hate using the term hair metal. I hate that term. It seems just, ugh. But if ever there was a band that I might call hair metal, it was Shy. I played the video, and I still don't remember the song. Other than Shy, the videos that were played on Headbangers Ball were by bands that we still know, like Ozzy, Maiden, AC/DC, Megadeth. And MTV continued each week with a guest host. One week it was Stryper. The next week it was Craig and Kirk from Metal Church. Then, May 23rd, 1987, MTV brought in what I believe to be one of the coolest hosts to be on Headbangers Ball. Dare I say she was my second favorite host on the ball, if I make myself the first. And yeah, I did say she, but this chick, believe me, she could totally kick your ass. She was punk, she was metal, and it was so obvious that she didn't really care what people thought, and that was why it was so perfect. On May 23rd, 1987, Wendy O. Williams from the Plasmatics hosted Headbangers Ball. She was apathetic. She seemed like she didn't care. She would say anything. She was sarcastic. I remember her doing the show in front of this screen that had nothing but maggots on it. And she'd lead to the videos, and she would say oh, and this is the big old maggot mosher Headbangers Ball. MTV even played the Cro-Mags on that show too. So MTV was starting to push a limit. She was so bad at it. You got to look, because there's some episodes on YouTube, and she just didn't care. And that was so cool again. That's what I liked. For the most part, bands continued to be the hosts on Headbangers Ball. And it was cool. At times, sometimes you would see the bands, struggle through segments or, like I said, act like they didn't care. And sometimes they were just drunk. AC/DC especially, they were so loaded. But those were really entertaining episodes. The Headbangers Ball was also becoming very important. Let's be real here. If you're a hard rock or heavy metal fan, this might be the only place you will see these bands moving if it's not on stage, because we didn't have an internet. You couldn't search and look for a video from your favorite band. So maybe if you saw Motley Crue play live, you wouldn't see them doing anything else except reading a magazine with pictures of them. And of course, you didn't find out about new bands as easily as we can now with the internet. So this became a Saturday night ritual for so many people. The Headbangers Ball was really important. So many people, I say all over America, but it really was global. I mean, Leah Vendetta tells me that she used to watch a Headbangers Ball when she grew up living in France. There were a lot of people that weren't allowed to watch a Headbangers Ball because they were young. They would go in their room Saturday night. Maybe they were supposed to go to bed, and they would turn on the Headbangers Ball and be flooded with all these metal videos. It was fantastic. I told you how important this was because all these fans are watching the Headbangers Ball, and the record labels knew it. So not only was it important to get your video on Headbangers Ball, it became a priority for a band to be on Headbangers Ball and promote their latest record or tour. And this also made it easy for us fans to kind of learn a little bit about who these people are and see how crazy they are. And it was really loose, and that was good. Judas Priest hosted, then Ace Frehley hosted, and then July 4th, 1987, MTV set a precedent on Headbangers Ball. The host was Downtown Julie Brown. Julie Brown was one of the prime time MTV VJs. Julie was attractive. She was British. Julie Brown was the host of Club MTV, a show that was all about dancing and dancing to dance music. Julie Brown is great, was a great VJ, a really cool person that I ended up working with a few times after MTV. But I'm sure she's going to be the first to tell you she was completely opposite of anything Headbangers Ball. But there was Downtown Julie Brown, who earlier in the day was hanging out with Paula Abdul, leading to videos later on from Black Sabbath and Dio. A few weeks later, Headbangers Ball was hosted by the guy that pretty much started it, Twisted Sister's Dee Snider. And then it was hosted by Ronnie James Dio, and then King Diamond hosted. Perfect. This was awesome. Adam Curry worked at MTV as a VJ about this time. I have no idea why they didn't have him host the show at first. I mean, at least he had long hair. And let me also chime in about the music played on Headbangers Ball back then. Most of it was mainstream metal, the bands that were on the charts. If I picked any videos on Headbangers Ball, I would have added some of the heavier stuff, some of the death metal bands, which, by the way, we all love to give Headbangers Ball a hard time. But the truth is, if you ever go back and look at old playlists, there were a lot of obscure metal bands. It wasn't only the popular bands. That's what we always think. Oh, it was only the really popular pop metal bands. But it's not true. They did have hardcore bands. They did have death metal bands in there as well. Hell, you can't ever please everyone. And boy, I sure learned that hosting that show. So let's get back to the hosts before me. In the early years, there were a lot of bands hosting the show. And whenever they had bands hosting the show, it was really cool. And then you add Downtown Julie Brown, which made no logical sense at all. And that's not a dig towards Julie because she's great. But come on, Headbangers Ball. Prior to me hosting, there were some great episodes, usually because of the guest hosts. Ozzy comes to mind, Anthrax destroying someone's house in a contest. It seemed like a bunch of episodes that they had were using Kevin Seal. Kevin Seal was kind of like a nerdy-looking dude, just typical short-haired, middle America white guy. But he was funny. He was also on Club MTV, and he hosted a show called Kevin Seal's Sporting Fool, which featured Kevin doing all sorts of kooky sports and other activities. He wore button-down shirts, and other than Julie Brown, was probably the least suited to ever host Headbangers Ball. And it was obvious that he knew that too. The interviews that he did were awkward, and you just knew he was not a fan of heavy metal. You wanted somebody that you thought at least dug the music, that wasn't like rolling their eyes. That's why it was so great to see all these bands hosting the show. Whenever Downtown Julie Brown or Kevin Seal were the hosts on the show, you pretty much knew it was only because MTV couldn't find a band to host the ball. So many times there would be guest hosts. Most of the time there would be guest hosts. Wasp, Blackie Lawless, and Chris Holmes were on it, the band Grim Reaper, Lizzie Borden, and then Kevin Seal would be back. This was 1987. I was still drinking and doing God knows what. Cat House had been open a little over a year, and my social life was okay. I was young, and I was not at home on Saturday nights, ever. My roommate Tammy and I finally got cable, and we'd watch MTV. But when we'd watch MTV, really all we watched on MTV was a British comedy show called The Young Ones, which was a great sitcom about four totally different roommates. And on that show, I remember like at any random time, a band might be playing in their living room. It could be Motorhead, The Damned, or Madness. On one particular Saturday night, I decided I'm going to stay home. I'm going to watch MTV's Headbangers Ball for the first time. This was a big deal for a couple reasons. The host was Kevin Seal again. He wore this nice button-down red shirt. He had khaki pants on, and he kept index cards on his lap with all the questions that he would ask. Why did I watch Headbangers Ball that night? Because my roommate was the guest. Tammy Down of Faster Pussycat. He was joined by then guitarist, the very handsome Greg Steele. Faster Pussycat was on MTV. This was like a big deal. It's like my roommate's band is getting big. I thought this was the coolest thing. Tammy and Greg made a few jokes. Kevin seemed very awkward, but Tammy was on MTV. Kevin Steele asked this question.
Well, you got a club, right?
Yeah,
part of it.
Yeah. Me and my roommate Riki, he's probably digging it. He's earned his name on MTV. We run a club in LA called the Cat House. It's every Tuesday night, and it's just where everybody comes down and hangs out. You know, it's no live bands. We just had dancing, and it's all strictly hard rock and roll.
So this was a big deal for several reasons. Tammy and Faster Pussycat were on MTV. Tammy mentioned Cat House on MTV. And even though all Tammy said was,
Yeah, me and my roommate Riki, he's probably digging it. He's earned his name on MTV.
it was the first time my name was ever on MTV. It was the first time my name was ever on MTV or TV or radio or anything. Big things are going to start to happen. And they did for all of my friends in Faster Pussycat and Guns N' Roses. And they were all starting to sell a lot of records. Jet Boy and Little Caesar and Bang Tango and Junkyard and the Four Horsemen. They were all selling records too. All these bands from our little scene were starting to get played on the Headbangers Ball. And as that scene grew, so did the Cat House. Meanwhile, let's go back to the ball. It's 1987. Headbangers Ball had left the confines of the New York studio with the Motley cruise to nowhere. Watching the show, it was kind of goofy. You know, the guys in Motley Crue were trying to act, and they were okay. They were doing certain scenes. I think there was a scene where they even threw Vince's wife, Charisse, overboard. It was still cool to watch the bands that we all loved in different situations than we had usually seen them in. In October of 1987, I probably watched the Headbangers Ball for the second time. The host was not one of the regular MTV VJs. The host was not one of the bands that were played on Headbangers Ball. The host was named Ashur Ben Ruby. Yeah, who was Ashur Ben Ruby? Well, in October 1987, Ashur Ben Ruby was also known as Smash. In the 70s, he was a radio personality in St. Louis. He worked in rock and roll, but he was just as out of place as Downtown Julie Brown or Kevin Steele. And he was a lot older than them. Poor Smash. He was the VJ when Guns N' Roses were the guests to promote Appetite for Destruction. I say this and I don't want to sound like a typical hater because I know what it's like when people would talk smack about what I did on Headbangers Ball, because this guy Smash was a radio personality and was really good in radio, but he was an older dude and he was really out of place. He was the VJ when Guns N' Roses were the guests to promote Appetite for Destruction. I think we've all seen this footage. I think his first question to Guns N' Roses was, well, you guys are really wackos, right? It was fucking weird. And to cut to the chase, Guns N' Roses totally destroyed the set. Just so you know, the destruction of the set was totally set up. It was known way in advance that Guns N' Roses, who led a reckless life, would come in and destroy the place. So they did. Headbangers Ball came back with a vengeance a few weeks later with host Kevin Steele. Kevin Steele sort of became the show host until March of 1988. Over a year, he hosted the Headbangers Ball with the occasional band hosting. Of course, Kevin Steele was also on Primetime, and then he would be on Headbangers Ball. Now, Adam Curry. Adam was born in Virginia, but lived in the Netherlands from 1972 to 1987. He did radio in Amsterdam, then got a gig in front of the camera as the host of the Dutch pop music television program Countdown. In 1987, Adam Curry came back to America. He worked on radio in New York, and then he got a gig as an MTV VJ. And like most of the other VJs, he bounced around on the shows 120 Minutes, the Countdown shows. And yes, Adam Curry was on Headbangers Ball. And this seemed to make much more sense. He put on his leather jacket and he had long hair, but it seemed to make more sense than Kevin Seal or Downtown Julie Brown did. He looked more the part. But of course, Adam Curry was a regular MTV VJ as well. He was tall, thin. He had that lovely long hair. And I'm not going to talk smack about hair because my hair was pretty goofy when I started MTV, so I'm in no position to talk. His was just more blow-dried, stylish. It was like feathered. He was a total professional with interviews and going in and out of videos during the day. Come on, Adam Curry had done that before. He'd done that for a living. Even though he may have been friends with Bon Jovi, he wasn't what you would call a metalhead. And I'm going to be honest. If you guys want me to slam Adam Curry, I'm not going to. Adam Curry was a good VJ. He just wasn't good for the Headbangers Ball. He was really professional and really slick, but sort of like I mentioned before, when you saw Lemmy or Wendy O. Williams or AC/DC, and they were all kind of really loose, and Howard Stern, it was just kind of going crazy. And Adam Curry was really slick. He did great interviews, didn't always ask just the generic questions, but it just didn't fit for Headbangers Ball. I do recall one show, Adam Curry was doing all the regular mainstream videos, and then he said, it's time for me to put on my leather jacket and get ready for 3 hours of the heaviest headbanging. Headbangers Ball, by the way, was now 3 hours long. The show was so popular, more and more metal bands were making videos. It was important. They'd even get record deals that had budgets to make videos that would get played on Headbangers Ball. Now, let's go back to Los Angeles, okay? It's now 1988 or something. The Cat House was not only the biggest rock club in Los Angeles, it was one of the most popular nightclubs, period. There were lines around the block every Tuesday night, no matter what was going on. I don't recall how this whole discussion went down. I really wish I did. And my goal is one day soon, Axl Rose will be on this podcast with me so we can retrace how this whole turn of events went down, or at least from his perspective. But this is what I recall, and this is what I've been told. I mentioned to Axl that I'd like to be the host of Headbangers Ball. I watched the show, and I think it was like really casually. I was like, dude, I'd like to be the host of Headbangers Ball. I don't even know where that came from because I wasn't a radio DJ. I wasn't on TV. I wasn't a journalist. I was just Riki from the Cat House. That's it. Oh, I'd like to be the host of Headbangers Ball. And Axl said to me, I'll make a call. I must have thought that he was fucking around, and I didn't think much of it. But when Axl Rose talks to the bigwigs at MTV and makes that call, they listen. And I believe Guns N' Roses manager Doug Goldstein also chimed in as well. I remember Carol Donovan, who was one of the producers at MTV, mentioning to Axl that she knew who I was simply from the Cat House, of course. The person that Axl spoke with at MTV was Abby Konowich, who was a big VP at MTV. Guns N' Roses were one of the biggest rock and roll bands at the time. So when Axl calls, like I said, you would listen to him. Not long after that, Axl tells me, very casually, I set up an audition with MTV in New York. I probably thought that he was kidding, but he wasn't. What you guys might not know about Axl back in the day is he really took care of the people that were in his circle. And I guess at the time, I was in that circle. Axl had been a good friend of mine for a couple years, And at this time, Appetite for Destruction was on top of the charts. I knew Axl before they had a record deal, and to be honest, it was always weird for me because my pal had become the biggest rock star in the world. Axl tells me he'll go with me to New York, and he slums it by flying business class. And I kind of upgraded because to me, flying business was a really big deal. We were escorted off the plane when it landed before everyone else, and we went down special hallways to a waiting limo. It was full rock star treatment. Well, because Axl is a rock star and I'm a guy hanging out with a rock star. Axl booked a room at the Mayflower Hotel in New York. He got a big old suite with 2 rooms, one on each side, and this like living room in the middle. We went out to dinner at this place called the Homestead, which is one of the best steakhouses around. I think it's been around since maybe the late 1800s, but definitely the early 1900s. And it's really, really famous. And down in the basement, they have all this meat lined up, and it's aging. And Axl and I took this really cool photo that I do show in my show One Foot in the Gutter that has Axl and I in this big meat locker at the Homestead. And this was the night before I auditioned for MTV. That night, we also went to the China Club. The Chili Peppers Flea had some kind of show going on. I don't remember too much about it. But at our table was Axl, myself, and Abby Konowich. Abby was a big deal as a programmer at MTV. So already I've met another bigwig at MTV before I even auditioned. So I'm doing okay. The next morning, I go to MTV, and I decided that I was going to go by myself. I didn't want to walk into the audition with Axl. So this was an audition. But this was an audition to be not the host of Headbangers Ball. It was an audition to be a regular VJ. Here is one important thing I want everybody to know. I had never been on TV. I'd never been in a movie. I'd never been on the radio. I never studied broadcasting ever. I walked into the studio with no experience at all. I had black pants on. I had a black Western shirt made by Lip Service. I sat in front of a camera for the very first time and read intros to music videos, regular music videos. But I did get to lead into the Paradise City video.
That was Paradise City from Guns N' Roses, my personal favorite video because Axl does wear a Cat House shirt in that video.
I'm looking at this clip right now, and I kind of look like a cocky little shit. The truth is, I was frozen. I didn't move much. I just introduced the videos that they'd given me, and I finished quickly, and I went back to my hotel. I have always been very, very hard on myself. I'm a walking contradiction. Sometimes I think that I'm the best at what I do, but then, of course, I come to my senses and I feel like a failure. It's called depression, people. I still cope with it. If you think I was a mess before the audition, like Tom Petty says, the wait is the hardest part. No. The way Tom Petty says it, he goes, the wait is the hardest part. Well, guess what? Waiting really sucks. Axl stayed in New York a few more days. I flew back, Coach, of course. I flew back to Hollywood, and then I went back to being Riki Rachtman from the Cat House, which was a very good thing. But I knew I had to do something else. I couldn't be that forever. Every time I'd get home, I'd take a look at the answering machine. Okay, for those of you that don't know what an answering machine is, we used to have machines, and these machines had tapes in them. And when someone would call you on the phone, if you didn't answer, there'd be a recording like you hear now that says, please leave a message. But that message would be on tape. And then you get home, and if you had a little red blinking light, that meant there was a message for you. And I always looked for that red blinking light. And every time I would see that red blinking light, I would get all excited and say, man, it's going to be MTV. It's going to be MTV. And the days passed, and I actually don't remember how long I waited. It could have been weeks. It might have been a month. And then I got a call from MTV. They said they wanted me to fly to New York to be a VJ for one day. Not the Headbangers Ball, just a regular VJ. Okay, that's a good sign, right? I mean, I'm going to go to MTV and I'm going to be a VJ. Deep down inside, of course, I wanted to be the host of Headbangers Ball. I didn't really want to be a primetime VJ, but that's good. I'm going to be a VJ. My slot would be 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. on a weekday. I'm going to go out on a limb here right now, okay? I'm guessing that would be the 2-hour slot on MTV that has the least amount of viewers. 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. I know that I wore a Los Angeles Kings jersey. I probably had another change of clothes. And I'm guessing that I had long sleeves so my tattoos didn't show. I cannot remember the videos or anything from that day at all. But I do remember when I got back to my hotel, I wondered what it would be like 2 days from now after my VJ debut on MTV. I'd be kind of sort of famous, right? Would I get recognized? There were times prior to MTV that I would get recognized, usually in LA, and people would, know me from being the Cat House guy. They'd say like, "Hey, are you Riki?" And I'd go, "Yeah." And then they would follow up with, "Hey, where's Tammy? Or where's Axel? Or where's Nikki?" But now I was an MTV VJ. Okay, I was for a day, or maybe 2 days, from 3 to 5 a.m. The show ended up airing while I was traveling on a red eye back to Los Angeles. You guys need to remember, MTV was huge at the time. Everyone had MTV. It was like a fish aquarium. Even if you weren't sitting down watching MTV, MTV was on in your house. Probably the only time it wasn't on was when you were asleep. But in other words, between 3 and 5 a.m. My debut as an MTV VJ came and went. One person came up to me once and said, "Were you on MTV?" And I said, "Yes." I don't even know if that counts because I had long hair and I had tattoos and I looked like I was in a band that would have been on MTV. So I think they asked if I was on MTV because they thought I was in a band that was on MTV, not because they saw my VJ debut between 3 and 5 a.m. So the Headbangers Ball continued without me. If it wasn't a band hosting, Adam Curry would do it. Adam Curry was now pretty much dialed in as the host of Headbangers Ball. And a lot of the metal fans were not into Adam, but he did the best job that he could. He just was never part of the scene, and it didn't help that he was on during the day introducing the mainstream videos. Then he'd put on his leather jacket and play the latest from Danzig. I mean, maybe if Adam Curry wasn't on during primetime and only did Headbangers Ball, that might have helped him. But us metal fans, we're a very loyal circle, and we want to see somebody metal doing the metal stuff. And when you saw him, interviewing, Paul Abdul or whatever, and then doing Headbangers Ball, you just didn't feel like he was the Headbangers Ball guy. So Adam was the primetime VJ, and he was the Headbangers Ball guy. Occasionally, I would watch the show, and I always had that little glimmer of hope that one day I'd be on that show. But week after week, I'm watching Adam Curry, and a lot of times he's interviewing my friends. On one episode, they even had Rat, and Rat was being interviewed by Tammy. So even Tammy was like a host on Headbangers Ball before I was. There were now different segments on the Headbangers Ball. They had one that was called the Metal Detector, and they might feature a news story from a tour or from the road. Adam Curry would go in and out of these segments with all the information. The 1988 Halloween edition of Headbangers Ball brought in comedian Sam Kinison. Again, it was unpredictable. It was maybe a little bit chaotic, but it was cool. It was raw. The Headbangers Ball had gotten bigger and bigger, and metal music got bigger and bigger, and now the Headbangers Ball was one of the biggest shows on MTV. So Headbangers Ball was doing the same thing that metal music was doing at the time. It was growing in popularity, and metal was getting huge. I would watch the show on occasion, but when I watched it, I was so jealous of Adam. I had pretty much given up on hosting the Headbangers Ball. So what am I going to do? I decided to open up another club called Bordello. Bordello never had bands except the time we had this celebrity play the VIP. Oh, that I'll say that for another show. But Bordello was even sleazier than the Cat House, and Bordello was so much fun. December 1988, I get a call from MTV. They're going to have a crew in Los Angeles, and they asked if I would be interested in being a Los Angeles correspondent on the Headbangers Ball. Of course, I said yes, and I even offered a location to shoot. Bordello. Carol Donovan was the producer of the Headbangers Ball at the time, and she must have seen something in me because she really supported me getting the job on Headbangers Ball. And I saw Carol a few weeks ago at my One Foot in the Gutter show in New York, and I even asked her, there were so many slick people that had TV experience, and I was so raw on camera, and I asked her, why did you guys hire me? And what Carol said is, and when she's somebody that I look up to, and when she told me this, it made me feel really good. She said that I wasn't necessarily great on camera, but that I was authentic and I was part of the scene. And Headbangers Ball shouldn't really have a really slick TV host. And they liked that I was just a metal fan kid. I think she even helped book the show that we shot at Bordello because the guests were all good friends of mine and Cat House regulars. You had the band Junkyard. You had Steve Jones, who of course was in the Sex Pistols, but had been a solo artist for a while. That's two bands that I knew really well. Guess who the third band was? Yup, Faster Pussycat. Adam Curry was still the host of Headbangers Ball, but what he would do is toss the segments with me. And I'm not going to lie, when that episode aired, I was like glued in front of the TV probably for an hour before the show started, just in case something weird happened and they aired it early. I didn't want to miss a second. I watched the show and then hoped I would get a call on Monday telling me they wanted me to be the new host of Headbangers Ball. And Monday, nobody called me. And the days turned to weeks, which turned to months. Summer 1989, MTV called, and I would ask if I would come to New York and fill in for an episode of the Headbangers Ball. Of course I did. And were my intentions to do the best job I could so they would give me the job as Headbangers Ball? Hell yes. This time, I was much more comfortable. I suggested we do a phone interview with Nikki Sixx and Cinderella's Fred Corey. I hung out with both of those guys a lot at the time, and I knew that when I asked them that they would be on the show and that I would feel comfortable and they would screw around with me, and it was pretty good. And it also showed MTV that I had a unique relationship with most of the bands at that time. So we shot the show, went into some videos, I flew back to LA, and again, waited, hoping I was going to get the call to host the Headbangers Ball. November 1989. It's the Cat House and Rip Magazine's 3rd anniversary. That show, which I haven't talked about, the 3rd anniversary of the Cat House, they had a band put together called GAC, and it was Guns N' Roses, Skid Row, and members of Metallica. And I think you had like Axl sing a Skid Row song, and maybe James sang a Guns N' Roses song, and I don't know, but it was like mind-blowing. It was just such an incredible show. And we shot Headbangers Ball. So once again, I was talking to people that I already knew from the club. It was like everything was aligning. Next episode of Headbangers Ball, Adam Curry hosted. And then he hosted it again. And the next show was hosted by Downtown Julie Brown, I figured, oh, if they brought Downtown Julie Brown back again, they're definitely not going to bring me in to host the Headbangers Ball. But eventually, I did get the call asking if I was interested. Well, you know the story. Of course I took the job. They asked me if I wanted to host Headbangers Ball. People, I think you can imagine, it was the coolest phone call in the world. Oh my God. I was going to be the host of Headbangers Ball, and this was going to be something totally new to me. I remember being in my hotel room, opening up the window at night, looking out at the city. And this sounds so like corny and dramatic, but I looked out at the city and I said, starting tomorrow, my whole life is going to change. But it did. So let's talk about the first episode on Headbangers Ball with me as the host. What was I going to wear? Well, of course, I wore a Motorhead shirt. I sat in makeup, and they put lots of makeup on me, and they made my hair all big. I looked a little silly, but now that I look back at those times, I guess a lot of us look kind of silly, right? And fuck, I was so nervous. I wrote an opening for how I would start my first episode as the host of Headbangers Ball, and then they put it on a teleprompter. If you don't know what a teleprompter is, it's like this TV screen that has all your lines scroll across, and you can just read it. But through mirrors or something, that screen that you're reading is right in front of the camera lens. So while it looks like I'm staring right at the camera, you can read the lines. The opening that I wrote, my first words as the host of Headbangers Ball was, they said the 90s were going to be kinder and gentler. Obviously, they had no idea what we were doing. I'm Riki Rachtman, and this is the all-new Headbangers Ball. Then a video of an old car jumping on a house, some old karate movies, and the song Prong Beg to Differ. That was the theme song of Headbangers Ball. There were other songs that were used as Headbangers Ball intro. SOD, March of the SOD, Zodiac Mind Warp, Prime Mover, Living Color, Cult of Personality. Pantera was used. I might be forgetting a few. I had a new set also to do Headbangers Ball, and I was going to break it in. You got to understand, this is so surreal. It's like I'm walking on this TV set of this show, Headbangers Ball, that I am the host of. You know when you wish for something and you really want it to happen, but it seems like it's out of reach and it's just too great of a thing that you're wishing for? Well, that's what it was like. And I could not believe that I was the host of Headbangers Ball. We had a desk with a chair like some of the late night talk shows. Of course, our desk had a big old skull painted on it, and there were like holes kicked in the desk. There was a green screen, and they could make the background look like fire and skulls and smoke behind me. Right next to the desk, there was a gray couch that had rips in it with the stuffing coming out, and skulls were painted on the couch. I overheard the producers talking about the couch, and they had mentioned a furniture store called Jennifer Convertibles. I thought they called the couch Jennifer, so I called the couch Jennifer. Even when I found out it was a furniture store, I ended up just calling the couch Jennifer, and pretty soon all the viewers of Headbangers Ball would call the couch Jennifer. Bands that were starting out would tell me when they met me how bad they wanted to come to the Headbangers Ball set and sit on Jennifer. People knew Jennifer was the name of the couch on Headbangers Ball. The first episode also had the band Anthrax, who I had never met. I was handed a few cards with questions, and I stuck to the questions, but I also added a few random ones. I'm just going to say this after watching that first interview. There really was no chemistry. Anthrax would use one-word answers, and I think I did a piss-poor job. This was probably the first time I had ever interviewed someone that I had never met. I'm happy to say that things did change through the years, and I've had a great time with Anthrax. We even did some Headbangers Ball episodes where we went on tour with them for 5 shows, and I like those guys a lot, and I'm just going to go out on a limb and assume that they like me. Okay, first episode's done. I told you the Anthrax interview didn't really go very good, but I ended the show with a catchphrase. I'm Riki Rachtman. Remember to keep one foot in the gutter, one fist in the gold. I ended every episode of the Headbangers Ball saying that. What that means is always go for the gold, always strive for success. But remember where you started. I started in Hollywood with no money, and damn, things were looking good in 1990. So I always remembered where I came from and still do. So I'd like to think that I've always got one foot in the gutter, one fist in the gold. Did you know on Five Finger Death Punch's latest album, they have a song that I think is called Gutter Gold, and the song says one foot in the gutter, one fist in the gold. I'm friends with Chris Cale that's in that band, and Ivan even had said, hey, we're doing this song that's pretty much takes your saying one foot in the gutter, one fist in the gold. Are you okay with that? And I was like, hell yes. I thought it was really neat that they had, remembered this saying and put it in one of their songs. While I am on the subject, I'm going to remind you again about my show, One Foot in the Gutter. It will be coming to Vegas. I'd say book your flights now and plan on spending several days, because on July 19th, 20th, and 21st, I will be a tour guide at the Punk Rock Museum. This is going to be awesome. So you're just going to hang out with me, and we'll have small groups, and we'll do a tour of the museum, and I'll talk about my early days in the LA punk scene and how punk really played a big part in metal, and talk about whatever you want. Now, to get tickets to the Punk Rock Museum, just go to thepunkrockmuseum.com. I'll be giving 2 tours a day, the 19th, 20th, and 21st. So what might be cool is to go there, get tickets for my tour of the Punk Rock Museum, but make sure you stay July 22nd, because my show One Foot in the Gutter will be at the Space in Las Vegas. I'm honest right now when I say I don't know if there's going to be any more One Foot in the Gutter shows. I would love to do this for a long time, but maybe I should write a book or write a second show or do something else. So this might be the last show. It's July 22nd, One Foot in the Gutter at the Space in Las Vegas. There are going to be VFI passes, which gets you a pre-show. We hang out. You're going to get a front row seat, a laminate, a poster. The VFI passes go on sale May 1st, and you can find that at cathousehollywood.com. On May 3rd, and by the way, this is 2024 because I don't know when you're going to listen to this podcast. On May 3rd, tickets go on sale for my July 22nd show at the Space in Vegas. For all that information, go to cathousehollywood.com. So we're all going to Vegas, and right now we're going to go back to New York City. While I'm on the subject of New York City, Leah and I were just there last week, and we visited the people at Shot, which makes black leather jackets, actually other color leather jackets, but they're like the epitome of the leather jacket company. Like Marlon Brando wore a Shot leather jacket in The Wild One, and Slash Duff, everybody's got Shot leather jackets. And I finally went to their shop, and after all these decades, I finally got like a really good black leather jacket. And this isn't an advertisement or anything like that. I just wanted to say, give a shout out to the people over at Shot New York City, because they were just really, really good people and just got a badass leather jacket. So thank you, Shot. Okay, so while we're in New York City, that was where we shot Headbangers Ball for almost the entire time the show was on TV. We spent a short time filming in Los Angeles, which was nice for me because I could ride my motorcycle to set. The Nirvana interview, a matter of fact, was shot during LA. But for the most part, we would shoot the show in New York City. Remember, I lived in Hollywood, and this is how it would go down. I would leave Los Angeles on Thursday, land in New York pretty late, then Friday morning tape 2 episodes of the Headbangers Ball and go straight to the airport Friday. I wasn't even in New York 20 hours, and it also meant that when we shot the show at 9 a.m., it was really 6 a.m., so I had to get up at like 4 a.m. after flying all night. I was tired on almost every episode of Headbangers Ball. I never slept much before shooting the ball. After episode 1, that first trip, I shot episode 2. And did it go much better than the Anthrax debacle? Michael Schenker was the guest, and he just played his guitar the entire time while I was talking to him. I mean, of course, he is an amazing guitarist, but it was really annoying because instead of answering a question, he'd break into something like, and I'm trying to talk to him and he's just like, it was not good. But damn, what a first week. What a first 2 episodes of Headbangers Ball. I was not happy with it and with my interviewing skills. Of course, I, being my own worst critic, obsessed about it, telling myself I'll never be brought back to host a Headbangers Ball, but I got a call, and I was going to do the next episode of Headbangers Ball in Texas on the set of the Without You video by Motley Crue. I'm going to work with friends again. And that episode was so much fun. I mean, I had known Motley Crue for a long time. I had flown to shows with Motley on their jet. When I got sober in 1988, Nikki Sixx and I got sober together. Most of the segments I taped that day were with Vince Neil, and you can find it on YouTube. It was really a blast. We fucked around. The guys teased me, and let me say about the teasing me and bands doing that while I hosted Headbangers Ball, a lot of the bands busted my balls on TV. I didn't mind it. Actually, I liked being the fall guy. The show went great. My confidence was back. And besides, I got to fly somewhere other than New York to go to work. How cool is that? Oh, not as cool as what happened 4 months later when I flew to Japan to shoot a show with Michael Monroe. I was a huge fan of his old band, Hanoi Rocks. Back in the Cat House days, that's what a lot of us were listening to, Hanoi Rocks. I got to go to Japan, and MTV paid for everything. And I got to hang out with Michael Monroe. And we got to shoot at like really cool locations in Japan. The following month, I'm flying to Texas again to hang out with Kiss as they started their tour. That same year, I fly to England and do the Monsters of Rock Festival. I know that Headbangers Ball had been criticized for not playing a lot of heavy music. Oh, that show, that's all Warrant, Poison, and Slaughter. And sometimes those were a lot of videos that we played. But you know what? I think the Headbangers Ball deserved a little bit more credit. In the first few months on the show, some of the guests that we had with me were DRI, Nuclear Assault, The Bad Brains, Suicidal Tendencies, and Death Angel. All of those bands were in the studio with me as guests. And now I want to talk about the videos played on Headbangers Ball. I have said this many times, but you would be blown away how many people still come up to me and talk about the videos that were played on Headbangers Ball. That people that believe that I would sit there with a pad of yellow paper and a pen and write down the videos that were going to be played on the show. I'm going to say this one more time. I didn't pick one single video ever on Headbangers Ball. Okay, not necessarily. On my birthday, I said, can we play something from Motorhead? And we played Ace of Spades, which we probably would have played anyway. But I had no say at all in the videos or bands that came on as guests on Headbangers Ball, unless it was somebody that I knew that was a big guest. And sometimes I would, set up a few interviews. But as far as the videos, I never had any say in that. And the problem that I had was if you were into bands like Cannibal Corpse or Death or Agnostic Front, you were like, why are you guys playing like Winger or Slaughter or Poison? Now, there were a lot of people that were into those bands like Skid Row and Faster Pussycat. And they were always saying, why are you playing bands like, Cannibal Corpse or Sepultura? And both of those groups blamed me. The truth is, Headbangers Ball played a lot of all the genres of rock and roll. And even in the later years, when we had bands like Rancid on, I'm pretty sure the Ramones were even on the Headbangers Ball, but I think that's cool. I was really stoked that we had different types of bands on the show. I will do another episode of the Cat House Hollywood podcast where I break down the most popular episodes of Headbangers Ball, but I'm not going to do it right now because in my live show, One Foot in the Gutter, I break down some of the great episodes of that show with video clips. Right now, I'm going to skip ahead 5 years. I'm now going to tell you why I thought Headbangers Ball was canceled. I know on today's show, we talked a lot about the Headbangers Ball before me and a lot about how I got the job, but I didn't go into too much detail about those 5 years hosting the show. 5 incredible years. And I will do that in another episode of the Cat House Hollywood podcast. So like I said, Headbangers Ball played all types of metal. One of my beliefs was if a band was played in the primetime slots, it shouldn't have been on the ball. I also thought Headbangers Ball should never, ever play a ballad. If a video from Motley Crue, like Wild Side, was played during prime time on MTV, then play Shout at the Devil. I thought Alice in Chains were a great band on Headbangers Ball. They gave us some of the best episodes. But if we played Man in the Box on Thursday at noon, don't play it on Headbangers Ball. Play something a little bit more obscure. I wanted Headbangers Ball to be the place that you could see videos that you wouldn't see anywhere else. In the final year that I was hosting Headbangers Ball, I was getting 400 handwritten letters a week. That's a lot of letters. That was more than any other MTV show. A large majority of those letters fell into 3 categories. Number 1, why'd you cut your hair? Number 2, why does Dave Mustaine hate you? And number 3, why are you not playing real metal? Why are you not playing heavy stuff when you're playing soft stuff? Or why are you playing all that heavy stuff when you should be playing bands like Winger? I answered all 3 of those letters. Why I cut my hair. I cut my hair because I'm a biker and my hair was driving me crazy and I just wanted to cut my hair. It's really nothing. MTV didn't ask me to cut my hair. Matter of fact, MTV told me not to cut my hair. Why does Dave Mustaine hate me? Dave Mustaine does not hate me. Dave Mustaine never hated me. Dave Mustaine was a friend. Dave Mustaine said in an interview not that long ago that he wanted me to succeed as the host of Headbangers Ball, so he wanted to make it rough on me. And to know that if I could make it through Dave Mustaine interviews, I could make it through any other artist. And to be honest, that's one of the questions that I still get asked about Dave Mustaine. And in my opinion, all these decades later, people remember those shows. Not that many people ask, hey, tell me about that interview that you did with Lars, which was a blast. But they seem to always ask about those interviews that Dave Mustaine gave me a hard time. So if you remember it, I think that's very flattering, even if it was Dave Mustaine giving me a hard time. And Dave Mustaine ended up playing my birthday party. He played the Cat House. We went skydiving together. Dave Mustaine and I were friends. But I enjoyed I'm not going to say I enjoyed him giving me a hard time. Sometimes it pissed me off, but I understand why he did it. Now, the third question was about the music played. And sometimes I would answer by saying that I agreed with the complaint about the programming. Like I said, I didn't like that we played ballads or the metal songs that were top 40 at the time. When I wrote that letter to somebody, I must have made a mistake on one of the addresses because it was sent back to MTV. I shoot an episode of Headbangers Ball. I fly home. Then a few days later, I get the call that I don't have to come to New York to shoot the show. Ever. Just like that, the show ended. And like I've said, I'm pissed off that I never got to shoot a final episode of the Headbangers Ball. I thought the reason the show ended so abruptly was because of the letter that I had written to somebody saying that I wasn't a big fan of some of the videos that we played on Headbangers Ball. And somebody high up was not happy that I wrote that. Was that the reason that the Headbangers Ball ended? I don't think so. Another reason that people say the Headbangers Ball ended was because the climate in music was changing. Poppy punk stuff was on the rise. Hip-hop was huge. Maybe Headbangers Ball wasn't getting the audience it once had. That's possible. I won't say that grunge killed metal because every one of those bands that we had on the ball. And I think Soundgarden really sounded like old Black Sabbath to me. And you would say that Nirvana and Alice in Chains and Soundgarden killed the Headbangers Ball, but so many people would watch those bands on that show. So that's bringing more people to watch the show. I still believe, though, that there was a big enough audience in 1995 to have kept Headbangers Ball on. But come to think of it, during that time, Cat House was about to close. Maybe the scene didn't have the million-selling metal bands like it did a few years prior. I recently heard another reason, and this was something that I just found out about and I've never shared until now. What you might have heard was the story that involved Stone Temple Pilots. Stone Temple Pilots were not only a huge band on Headbangers Ball, but Stone Temple Pilots were a huge band all over the world. Stone Temple Pilots were nice enough to play at the Cat House. You know that acoustic version of the song Plush? That was recorded during an episode of the Headbangers Ball. So STP, one of the biggest band in the mid-90s. And now we go to 1993. And the guest on Headbangers Ball was the band Butthole Surfers. We played a video from Stone Temple Pilots. Please understand, I think that STP is a good band. But when that song Plush came out, when the dogs start to smell, that song reminded me a little bit of Jeremy by Pearl Jam. And at that time, there were several bands that were singing that same kind of low singing like Eddie Vedder. And I guess Stone Temple Pilots was getting criticized for that. And they were very sensitive. So Gibby Hayes, the singer of Butthole Surfers, is with me on the Headbangers Ball, and we were having a blast that episode. We play a video from Stone Temple Pilots, and Gibby says, who does that band sound like? To which I reply, well, who don't they sound like? 5 words. Who don't they sound like? That's it. I remember sitting at my office in Los Angeles, and I get a call from MTV. Atlantic Records were so furious with my comment that they told MTV they would not do anything with the music channel and Stone Temple Pilots again. Stone Temple Pilots were just bent out of shape. They were furious, and they were also one of the biggest bands. So MTV is not happy with me. I think it was Nancy McDonald, who's great. She was one of the producers of Headbangers Ball. She calls me and she tells me, look, Atlantic Records is furious. Stone Temple Pilots are furious. And now MTV is really pissed off because STP doesn't want to do anything with the channel anymore. Nancy asked me to call Weiland and apologize. Apologize for those 5 words. Who don't they sound like? I agreed. I called. Dean DeLeo, the guitarist, answered the phone, and basically I kissed butt, but I apologized. I said, look, it wasn't meant that way. I explained myself. Dean pretty much said, it's cool and not an issue. It seems like everything ended up okay because Stone Temple Pilots did tons of stuff with MTV, and I had thought everything was cool and not an issue. It seems like there was a person that was pretty big at Atlantic Records that was still unhappy with me years after that show, and they didn't like me being the host. And I guess this person was good friends with another person that was kind of high up at MTV, one that I'd always thought was a friend. It seems like both of these people wanted me gone. They decided my time at Headbangers Ball was gone. And I guess one of them was also friends with a girl named Jackie Ferry, who at one point was Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love's nanny. They believed that she should host the show. All I know is the Headbangers Ball and I broke up. And to be honest, I'm not sure if any of those reasons that I just gave you were the definite reason. But as far as the breakup between me and Headbangers Ball, and I say breakup because that's what it felt like. It felt like the kind of breakup where someone that you love just calls, quits, and moves on without ever an explanation of anything. I mean, I was Riki Rachtman from Headbangers Ball, the show that I had hosted every weekend for 5 years. They call me at home and they say, there's going to be no more episodes of Headbangers Ball. I don't even get to come to MTV to say thank you to everybody, to say thanks for the fans for watching, to thank the bands. Nothing. It just ended. And the next week, there was a show on called Super Rock, which was hosted by Jackie Ferry. Jackie was always cool to me before that time, too. She's nice. Did an executive at Atlantic Records get together with an MTV exec, one that I thought was my friend, and do everything they could to cancel the show abruptly, only to have a new show hosted by one of their friends? Or was it the Stone Temple Pilots comment? Or possibly the return letter of me complaining about some of the videos? Was it simply the scene had died away? If that was the case, that it was just the scene had died and the ratings weren't what they once were, you would think that they would still let me host a final show. It kind of felt like someone at MTV didn't like Riki Rachtman very much. Didn't let me do a final episode. I loved the Headbangers Ball. Yeah, there were certain things that I kind of disagreed with sometimes, but I am so proud to have been the host of that show and so damn grateful for some of the staff believing in me. I reached out several times through the years to MTV and told them, hey, why don't you let me shoot a final episode of Headbangers Ball? I will do it for free, or if you have to pay me, I'll give all the money to charity. Nope. Then, in 2003, I get a phone call from MTV. And yeah, I was excited. They told me the Headbangers Ball was coming back, and who did I think would be a great host for the new Headbangers Ball? And I told them, me! They didn't seem too thrilled with that answer. So I gritted my teeth and I gave them 2 other suggestions. Number 1, Billy Milano from SOD and MOD. If you know who Billy is, that would have been epic. I gave them 1 other suggestion. Jamie Josta from the band Hatebreed. I love Jamie. I dig his band. He's a great frontman. He's great on the mic. Jamie ended up getting the gig on MTV too, and he hosted it for a few years. He did a great job, but it wasn't the same Headbangers Ball. You see, Jamie is like a hardcore guy, and nobody would kind of tease Jamie on Headbangers Ball because he's the singer of Hatebreed, for crying out loud. I know when I was on the show, bands were able to take little jabs at me. Come on, Danzig, throwing me in the fire. That was frigging hilarious. You remember what started that, right? Glenn tells me, don't talk about the Misfits ever getting together because we're never getting together. And I said on the show, hey, what if for one pay-per-view you get the band? And that's when he pretended to throw me in the fire. Understand, Danzig was a friend. He played at my clubs. He used to hang out there all the time. And I think if I said who were my favorite bands the whole time I hosted Headbangers Ball, because I said like a lot of bands were my favorite bands, but I think 2 of the bands that I said were my favorite most of the time were Suicidal Tendencies and Danzig. I love Danzig, still do. The Dave Mustaine shows, people still remember those. Dave Mustaine wouldn't give Jamie Josta a hard time because it wouldn't make sense. I wanted Headbangers Ball to be fun, and come on, it was. Was there ever a better episode ever in the Headbangers Ball history than the Action Park visit with Alice in Chains? I have a lot of Headbangers Ball stories, and like I said, I will share them in future Cat House Hollywood podcasts. And I got to mention it really quickly since I mentioned Action Park. In my show, One Foot in the Gutter, I show some never before seen footage of our trip at Action Park, which we didn't know was the deadliest amusement park around. That show was so much fun, and Alice in Chains got it because we always goofed around. That was my favorite episode of the Headbangers Ball by a landslide. It was a blast. Do you know who I never interviewed? You're never going to guess in a million years. Believe it or not, I don't think I've ever interviewed Axl Rose. Don't you think that's kind of weird? I mean, the guy that helped me get that gig on Headbangers Ball and the guy that was always such a good friend and helped me so much starting my career has never been a guest on the Headbangers Ball or my podcasts. It's tough for me to come to terms with being old because I am old. And most people out there never saw Headbangers Ball. Do you realize if a person was born on the day of my first episode, they would be 32 years old right now? I see young metal kids, and my ego just waits for one of them to say, "Hey, you're the guy from Headbangers Ball." The show ended 27 years ago. So how can I expect a 27-year-old metal kid to know who the hell I am? I've met kids that have seen Headbangers Ball on YouTube or read about the Cat House. It is so cool and an honor to meet people at my show, One Foot in the Gutter, that are young and fascinated by the Headbangers Ball or the rock era of the 80s and 90s. As episode 4 begins to wind down, you might say to yourself, you know, in this show, there was a huge gap. What about the episodes of Headbangers Ball? What about what happened behind the scenes on Headbangers Ball? I will eventually get to another Headbangers Ball episode of the Cat House Hollywood podcast. Sometimes on social media, people tell me like, dude, why don't you bring back the Headbangers Ball? Let me tell you something. I want to bring back the Headbangers Ball. I have tried. I told MTV I'd do it for free. You know, I've tried different platforms to do it myself, but I just can't do it myself. There was an app for a while called Gimme Metal, and I did a show called The Ball on the Gimme Metal app, and I wrote and hosted and filmed and produced and edited that show. And I'll be honest, I think the show was really, really good. I got to pick all the videos, new stuff, old stuff, great band interviews. But the Gimme Metal app went away, so did The Ball. So I did try, I really did. Hey, you know, we have Cat House shirts and Headbangers Ball swag at cathousehollywood.com. Use code BALL4, that's BALL4, and get 10% off cathousehollywood.com. And don't forget, I'm going to be in Las Vegas in July with my One Foot in the Gutter show, and I'll be giving tours of the Punk Rock Museum. And I'm excited about all those events. So for all that information, by all means, go to cathousehollywood.com. Let me tell you something, brothers and sisters. Rock is not dead, even though the Headbangers Ball is. I'm still damn proud to have been on MTV. And I'm also grateful that most of the people that saw me on that show enjoyed what I did. For some of you, every Saturday night, you watch the Headbangers Ball. And I ended every episode the same way I'm about to end this Cat House Hollywood podcast. I'm Riki Rachtman. Remember to keep one foot in the gutter, one fist in the gold.